Switch 2 motherboard has been leaked, gentlemen, and now we know the true specs and true power of Nintendo's next generation console.
Matt, I'm hard.
Breasts.
Okay, so it seems like just when I'm kind of getting bored of talking about Switch 2 news, there's something that pulls me back in. And this definitely pulled me back in, like really pulled on me. That sounds weird, but that's what happened. There is a YouTuber named Geeker Wan. I believe he's from China. And it's funny because people in the comments section were like, dude, you haven't uploaded a video in a year. The last video he uploaded was talking about the specs of the iPhone 15 before this Switch 2 motherboard leak. And so it's pretty interesting. It just pops up out of nowhere, drops a Switch 2 motherboard leak and talks about all the specs and what's on the actual motherboard, and he just vanishes again like he has wings and goes off into the sunset. Whatever, it's pretty awesome. He got his hands on a Switch 2 motherboard. Well, not only did he do like a teardown of the motherboard, he actually tried to get it to power up. It wouldn't. Who knows if it's because the board is defective? Who knows if there's parts missing from it? Whatever the case may be. Well, even though they couldn't get the board to power on, they brought it to a lab where they actually had it like broken down, and they looked at the CPU and the silicon under a microscope, and they found out everything about the Nintendo Switch 2, what kind of RAM it's going to have, what the speed of the RAM is, what the GPU is capable of, what the CPU cores are, everything. And we're going to go over it here. They even did some rudimentary benchmarks, and they tried to compare it to an RTX 2050 mobile GPU, which it's kind of similar to. And they even did some CPU benchmarks and did something they felt was comparable on the CPU side. There's a lot of details here. I did trim the fat. If you want to see the original video from Geeker Wan, shout out to that channel. I'll have a link to it below in the description so they go into the full detail. I'm just going to kind of give snapshots of things that I thought were interesting, and then I'll give you my final take on what I think of the Switch 2's hardware and what I think the future of the Switch 2 will be with these specs that we now officially know about it. Like, come on, this is the real deal. Now, as you're seeing here, this is the motherboard. You're seeing the NVIDIA system on a chip. There's going to be 12 gigabytes of SK Hynix LPDDR5X 128-bit RAM running at 8,533 mega transfers per second. So it's really fast DDR5 RAM. It's going to have 256 gigabytes of SK Hynix UFS, Universal Flash Storage, which is using the standard UFS 3.1, and this should give it read speeds of 2100 megabytes per second and write speeds of 1200 megabytes per second, approximately. For wireless connectivity, we're going to have the MediaTek MT3681AEN that just rolls right off the tongue. That's the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chip. It's going to be Wi-Fi 6, not 7, unfortunately, but it'll be perfectly fine. The power supply that they're using for the SoC is the PMIC Dialog DA9092, which maxes out at 34.4 watts. And for audio, they're using a Realtek ALC 5658 audio codec. Now, the die size of the NVIDIA SoC, or the Switch 2 SoC, we could say, it's a beefy boy. It's 207 millimeters. And if you compare it to like the 3050 Ti die size at 200 millimeters, the Ryzen 7 7840H, that's an 8-core 16-thread chip with 178 millimeter die size. The Apple M2 is 155 millimeters, and the Snapdragon X Elite is 170 millimeters. So it's a huge die. Now, the interesting thing about the NVIDIA SoC is that they brought it to this lab, and what they saw when they looked at it under a microscope is that the chip was taped in 2021. Now, there was rumors that the Switch 2 was actually going to release earlier than June 5th, 2025, but they delayed it. And if you look at what they saw under the microscope, again, it was taped in 2021. That's a long time, even for a console, to have a chip being manufactured and to when it was put into hardware. So it kind of adds some more credibility to the rumors that the Switch 2, they were thinking about releasing it earlier, which I kind of thought they would too, because man, that Tegra X1 in the original Switch is super long in the tooth. So it kind of would make sense, but whatever, here we are. They're releasing the Switch 2 not even a month from now. Okay, so when it comes to CPU specs, we have 8 A78 ARM cores with 4 megabytes of level 3 cache that's shared with all the 8 cores, running at 1.1 gigahertz in dock mode and 1 gigahertz in handheld mode, and each core has 256 kilobytes of L2 cache. Now, the GPU cores stem from NVIDIA's Ampere design. I think I'm saying that right, aka the RTX 30 series GPUs. It has 6 texture processing clusters with 2 streaming multiprocessors per core, and it has 1,538 total CUDA cores. Now, GeekerOne did some benchmarks, and what they did is they had a massively downclocked mobile RTX 2050 from a laptop to kind of have an apples to apples comparison, even though it still kind of isn't, with the GPU inside of the Switch 2. And the benchmarks, they were benchmarks. They were okay. I mean, all right. Anyway, I'll shut up now. I'll show you some performance numbers and then we'll discuss. Now, what GeekerOne did for these benchmarks is they ran the clock speeds at what they would be in docked mode. Then they also ran the benchmark at what the specs would be in handheld mode, and they showed how the games ran. And here we go.
I'm hard.
All right, so let's start off with Cyberpunk 2077, which is going to be a launch game for the Switch 2. Docked mode. Again, these are simulated where they took a 2050 mobile GPU, downclocked the crap out of it, and tweaked the settings to kind of make it like dock mode in Switch 2. And then they tried it with what would be simulated to be handheld mode in Switch 2. So we'll start with docked mode for Cyberpunk 2077. There's 2 modes. We'll start with quality and what it would be on the Switch 2, kind of. 1080p, low settings, DLSS set to quality, so the game is rendering natively at 720p and the image is being reconstructed to 1080p with DLSS. You got about upper 30-ish FPS. Keep in mind, too, that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to have dynamic resolution, so that should help with frame rates. Anyway, moving on. Docked mode performance, because they're going to have a performance mode with Cyberpunk. Again, it's docked that they're trying to simulate here. 1080p, low settings, DLSS set to performance, 540p, native rendering. Again, the image is being reconstructed up to 1080p, and you're getting about 40-ish FPS. Now, Cyberpunk 2077, handheld mode, quality, 1080p, low settings, DLSS set to performance, 540p, native rendering. You're barely getting 30 FPS. It kind of hovered, went below, upper 20s, hit 30. It wasn't great. Handheld mode performance, 720p, low. DLSS set to performance. So the game is rendering natively at 360p and the image is being reconstructed to 720p. Upper 30s. With the FPS, and I have in my notes here that it looked like crap, because it did. It looked like that. I felt like I had Vaseline over my glasses when I was looking at the game running. Black Myth Wukong, docked mode, 1080p, low preset, DLSS set to balance, so the game was rendering at a weird resolution of 626p and being upscaled or reconstructed once again. 30-ish FPS, looked okay, not bad. Now, Black Myth Wukong, docked mode, 1080p, low preset with DLSS set to ultra performance. So it was rendering the game natively at 360p. And it got about 40 FPS, went below, went above, around there. And then there's Black Myth Wukong in handheld mode. The game is running at 720p, low preset, and DLSS is set to ultra performance, so it's rendering the game at 240p. Man, those are those are some chunky pixels. And they were struggling to get the game to run at 30 FPS. Again, if we do see Black Myth Wukong coming to the Switch 2, I'm sure the devs can do some optimizations to it to make it run better. But nonetheless, they got their work coming out for them if we see Black Myth Wukong on the Switch 2. In one game, unless they do a bunch of optimizations that you are probably not going to see on the Switch 2 unless they overhaul the whole game, which they may very well do, especially if the Switch 2 does big numbers, is Monster Hunter Wilds. 720p, low preset. This is docked mode. DLSS set to ultra performance, rendering at 240p natively, and yeah, it didn't hit 30. It was brutal. It was like a slideshow. Monster Hunter Wilds in its current form without optimizations is a no-go on the Switch 2. But just for the hell of it, how is it in handheld mode? They were masochists. Credit to them. 720p low preset, DLSS set to ultra performance, and it was even more of a slideshow. So moving on. Now, one game that looked way more promising is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This is in docked mode, or simulated in docked mode, for the Switch 2. 1080p medium preset and DLSS set to performance, 540p. And we were staying around the mid-30s here. The game looked pretty good. So I could definitely see them bringing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 to the Switch, and especially with even better optimizations for the actual hardware, the game will probably run and look even better. And handheld mode was pretty decent as well. 720p, medium preset, DLSS set to performance, so it was rendering in native 360p, which, that's still brutal. I understand DLSS can work some magic, but damn. Nonetheless, didn't look bad. Stayed in the 30s, or around the 30s, I should say. Again, with optimizations, dynamic resolution, and tweaks to DLSS, I'm sure the game will run and look even better in handheld mode. Now, Black Ops 6 in Switch 2 simulated dock mode, 1080p, low preset, DLSS set to ultra performance, so it's rendering natively in 360p. Man, chunky pixels, but nonetheless, they got it to stay around 60 FPS. And again, this is just them simulating the Switch 2 hardware with PC hardware. So that's promising. In handheld mode, it was a little bit of a different story here. Again, they simulated the handheld mode on the Switch 2, 720p, low preset, DLSS set to ultra performance, and they were getting about 40 FPS with Black Ops 6 on the Switch 2 in simulated handheld mode. They're going to have to do better than that. Everyone's used to at least 60 FPS with Call of Duty, but what this shows me is that it's definitely doable. Now, when it comes to the Switch's CPU performance, there's a glass half full and a glass half empty way that you could look at this. Let's go with the glass half empty viewpoint first. It doesn't look great on this chart. They compared it to the i7-4700 HQ, for example, which is on this chart here. And that is a chip that came out in 2013. And that over decade-old CPU from Intel is beating the Switch 2's ARM A78C cores by a fairly decent amount. Now, that's the glass half empty perspective. If you go into the glass half full perspective, look at the original Switch. Look where that benchmark number is at in Geekbench. And look at the Switch in handheld and dock mode. I think they have them flip there, but we're seeing about a 600% performance improvement from the original Switch. So there you go. Yay. Glass half full. Am I right? So, okay. I know you want my opinion now. Linus Tech Tips or Gamers Nexus, I am not, but I know a decent amount about specs and things like that. And I'll say this first. Let me say this first because I know people are going to jump on me metaphorically. Please don't jump on me. I understand that this is simulated, and again, you're dealing with the bloated drivers of PC, and PC games are not as optimized as console games, because when developers make games for consoles, they only have to worry about a couple pieces of hardware. There was a time they only used to have to worry about one piece of hardware from each company, but nonetheless, there's only going to be one Switch 2. And I'm sure even when they release refinements and they're going to make a Switch 2 OLED and a Switch 2 Lite, so on and so forth, it's still going to be the same SoC in there, minus maybe a smaller fabrication process down the line. So the good news is that I'm sure at worst, this is just the baseline of things we can expect, even though, it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison. And I'm sure the hardware optimizations that developers will do when they produce games for the Switch will make them run even better than what we see here. But even though I knew, I remember Digital Foundry talking about how it was going to be equivalent to a mobile 2050, I believe it was them, an RTX 2050 that is, I was expecting a little bit more out of the performance. I mean, if you look at one of the charts there when it comes to the GPU performance, the 780M, that is, let me show you something. The 780M, which is integrated graphics on some of AMD's CPUs, or APUs you could call them. Like this has the Ryzen 7 7840U in here, and this has the Radeon 780M integrated graphics, which has 12 compute units, and it's based on RDNA 3. And I was hoping, in terms of performance, and again, I know that we can't just take what we saw with someone downclocking a mobile RTX 2050 and make it Bible for what the Switch 2's performance is going to be. But to see the delta in between the 780M that's in here and what they were getting for their simulated Switch 2 benchmarks, it was like, oh man, that's surprising. And it's not surprising in a good way. And actually, I pulled up the chart again. I almost forgot to mention these 2 points. The simulated Switch 2 GPU in docked mode actually gets beaten by the 1050 Ti, which is an ancient GPU from NVIDIA. And in handheld mode, again, thank God I brought this chart up again. I had notes for this, but forgot to actually talk about it. The Switch 2 in the simulated handheld mode is actually getting beaten. This is the 3D Mark Steel Nomad Lite benchmark, by the way. Actually gets beaten by the Steam Deck. What happened to the rumors that it was just slow? It was behind the Series S. Where did that go? Anyway, now am I still excited for the Switch 2? Yes, it's still a huge jump in performance from the original Switch. And I would say from at least 2022, it has been time to move on from the ancient original Switch hardware. But was I expecting not a lot more from the Switch 2 in performance-wise? And again, I know these are simulated benchmarks. It's not like they were able to actually get that motherboard powered up and run benchmarks on the actual SoC that's going to be inside the Switch 2. I get that, but I expected a little bit more out of it. Let's go to moderate amount more out of it. And hopefully hardware optimizations are what's going to save it. At least it's more powerful than a PlayStation 4, right? Thank God. It's more powerful than the system that's over a decade old. But again, I'm sure I'll have fun playing Mario Kart World and maybe the system when it comes out, and I'll get Cyberpunk 2077, even though I'm not really a big fan of the game, just to see how it runs on there, and maybe it'll surprise me. And if it does, you know why this channel's called Richard Tomorrow, because if circumstances change, I will change my opinion, because I'm not an idiot. Or, yes, I am, but I change my opinion when circumstances change, which I think everybody should do. But that's where I got the name Rich Tomorrow from. I'm signing out now. Have a good one. I'm recording this at it's past midnight. I'm exhausted, birds.
I'm hard.
Hey, if you watched the whole video, what the hell are you doing? You're not subbed yet? Click that sub button. I live stream here all the time. We have a good time. Make sure to become a subscriber. It's free. Click the button now and hit that bell too. Be a man.